Hi, welcome to Nothing Venture, Nothing Game. I'm your host with most, your GM Jared, and today I'm going to be reviewing, if you saw it, we did an unboxing of Grim Hollow's Kickstarter, and I'm going to be doing a quick review of their monster manual, so stick around for that. Thanks for sticking around, and this is it right here, the Grim Hollow, the Monster Grimoire by Ghostfire Games. Now, you could go to their website, links in the description down below, and you could still get this PDF or the hardbound book. They are taking, it's on their website, so you could still check it out. Now, if you don't know, Grim Hollow is for 5th edition, Dungeons and Dragons, obviously, and this is a monster manual of the monsters in their homebrew grimdark universe. Now, can you bring this into your own universe? 100%. There's some great monsters in this book that I would 100% recommend bringing into your book, especially if you're playing certain campaigns that kind of overlap with the grimdark, such as Curse of Strahd. Curse of Strahd has, you know, vampires and scary gothic stuff. And one of the really cool monsters that are in here, it's a blood ooze, and it specifically has to deal with vampires. Vampires in the lore has to deal with vampires using blood oozes in their world. But obviously, you can use any monster and kind of fit it into any part of your universe. So with that being said, let's get into the things I really liked about this book. So first off, this book has 2 chapters dedicated specifically to monsters. It's kind of weird. The first chapter is just monsters, and then the second chapter is vampires. And this was one of the things I really liked. They go into vampires of different species. So an elf vampire, a dwarf vampire, a orc vampire, a halfling vampire. Halfling vampires are really cool and super creepy because they're childlike, and it just creeps me out, like little children monsters. So that goes in there. It's 402 pages of monsters. Then there are other chapters after that that deal with running intelligent monsters and how you should kind of look to run them, as well as magical items. So this comes with magical items. So that's awesome. So you get magical items, a GM section where if you're playing and it's the first time dealing with intelligent monsters, or just not like cannon fodder, like neutral thugs who are like chasing you and the players, and if they get beat up they run away, right? How you would run vampires or other such intelligent monsters. And then you have all the monsters. Now, so like I said before, the blood ooze, and I figured since I talked about it already, let me just bring it up. So this is what you get. This is your general 5th edition monster manual stuff. If you played 5th edition or you're coming into 5th edition, this is what your monster manual would look like. You have your monster challenge rating. So this is a CR7, so it's a little higher in the ranking. Oozes are typically higher in ranking. And then it gives you its stats but this is what I really like. It gives you a lot of lore. So as you can see in the top, it says what it is, right? So this is a bloody pet. Vampires and practitioners of blood magic use this creature in their world, and they keep it and stuff like that. But also it gives you 2 great things, and this is throughout this whole book. And if you're from Wizards of the Coast, or if you're making your own homebrew stuff and you're looking at how to put together a monster manual, this is it. This is it right here. 1,010%. This is how you do it. You give a little bit, you give lore, right? Obviously bigger monsters have bigger lore. There's like a Blight Dragons and other crazy monsters, tons of lore, right? But you give Salvage, and Salvage is really cool. It talks about what the players would get after defeating this beastie, and it goes through all of them. There are humanoids in here, like knights and villains like that. And it says like this is what they would have on them. Like some of the knights have holy water on them, and if you defeat them, you would get holy water, or if you knock them out. And this just blows my mind, right? So lore, we all want to know more, like how to know more. I want to know more. And this, many of them give you multiple. Most of them have 2 options, as you can see. But some of them have even like 3 or 4 options at higher DCs. So if you built a character, let's say you playing a ranger and you're like, oh man, I really built into ranger. I have nature and a DC 10 nature check, and then that's the lore. Now, if you can read, you could see that the lore for the 2 different ones, nature and history, are completely different. So let's say I roll nature, I get that information. Now, someone in my group might roll history, and they get a completely different amount. Obviously, it's a 5-point difference there, but they get a different amount of information. So let's say I whiff my roll. I roll a 2, plus my bonuses. I only have a plus, let's say 5. I got a 7. I whiff my check. So the GM's like, oh, you're not sure? You heard something about these creatures being dealt with, like, they're red. They call them blood oozes. That's really about it. And then maybe the wizard's like, well, can I roll history? Maybe I read about it in a book. And sure, I roll my check, and then, I rolled a 15 and plus my bonuses, right? So I pass. So you get this different lore. And that's really awesome. That makes players want to keep doing those checks. And as you play through the campaign, you'll start to notice that your players want to make those checks on lore. The salvage is awesome. How many times you've been a GM and let's say you're like, okay, you prep out monster fights and they fight an ooze. What does oozes really have? You have gelatinous cubes. They kind of eat the flesh of the creature, so they leave the armor behind, but it also is acid, so it damages the armor. So, like, unless it's magical, and then it's left there. But, like, what else can this do? And this tells you, like, some of the monsters you can salvage, and it's like, you can use this for magic potions. You can use this for specific spell ingredients. So if you have a herbalism kit, you can use this to make potions. If you have a brewer's tools, you could use this. And it goes and it has tons of different salvage options. And I love that. I love bringing in toolkits and bringing them into your campaign, because how many times have we had, like, I took the jeweler's kit, and yeah, we've had the expansions and stuff like that in the other books. But how many times you fight a monster and, like, okay, so I have a jeweler's kit. It really comes into play later when I'm downtime. But all of a sudden I kill a monster and let's say it's an ice golem and its eyes turns to crystals, and I can salvage these eyes to use it with my jeweler's kit to make like an amulet of frost protection or something like that. And then all of a sudden now it's like, oh wow, like I got something for having this kit that I started the game with and I've yet to use. So that's really awesome. Another thing I really liked about this, right? These stat blocks are very simple. It gives you the major skills. So it says, hey, stealth is +4. So you roll stealth, you have a +4. Then it says its proficiency bonus is +3. Very simple. Stat blocks are all very self-contained. They kind of simplified stats instead of like being like, oh, this is this. If you see other stat blocks, some of them have like a lot of fluff in the areas where you really wouldn't use that information. Like they have a diplomacy of a +2. You're like, what? I don't need that information. What I do need is, it's stealth, because if it's attacking, and why, well, obviously this one has a -4, so its diplomacy is not going to be that high. But, like, oh, it has a +2 acrobatics, and you're like, really? Like, or a +4 acrobatics? You're like, okay, its dex is +1, so it's proficient in acrobatics? Okay. Not really useful for the ooze, but sometimes stats, they kind of blow them up. In this book, they kind of simplified a lot of the stats. So right here, you see, again, this is specific to their world, in the Grim Hollow world, but you have Champions of Filth. Obviously, these are humanoids with magic power. Really awesome art. Again, a thing I liked, artwork is spectacular. You see this and you instantly get a grasp of what's going on. The color scheme, beautiful. This one, the character over here with the glowing hand, you see everything. Their two-handed weapon, their armor is kind of ruined. It's all frayed at the edges, which is beautiful, and it's a lot of detail. But right there, you see the salvage. You got a ton of information. Alchemic supplies, arcane nature, medicine can remove you know, the Blight Walker and tons of information, right? And you have all this lore. And then if we move over, sorry, I'm leaning forward just to go next over. There's the Blight Walker. So you got two of the champions. And then you see, again, remember I spoke about the lore. And then there's 3 checks: history, medicine, and arcana. And they jump by 5, right? So it's a little harder. But if you invested in those checks, it really comes out. And again, these stat blocks, super simple. Skills, intimidation. Clearly, that's all they're doing, right? I don't need to know everything else. Languages, any 2 languages. Pick 2 languages that make sense. You know, obviously, common is a standard one. So they would have 2 more. Maybe they're elvish. So they have elf, and they also know a giant. Done. You know, it makes sense. Or maybe goblin, because in your world, the you know, they're filth. They works with goblins, you know. And it's basic stats. You got your spells right there. You got everything. It's nice and small, very simple. They were able to get 2 monsters, and then your GM advice. Some of them have GM advices right there. Super simple. It's a lot of GM advice. You know, really awesome stuff. And then again, earlier before I spoke about vampires. Here's a whole section on vampires, what causes vampirism, ancestries, the needs, curing, you know, all this jazz. And that's wonderful, especially, again, if you're playing Curse of Strahd, or if you're playing a campaign, maybe it started in Curse of Strahd, or you just want to have a campaign about vampires. You know, you get a ton of stuff now. And then, again, they have the vampire salvage and 2 pages, regional effects. What happens when there's a vampire in the area? There's usually some kind of effect they have on the world around them. And again, beautiful art, real weird, creepy eye. And then something I didn't think I needed, but what would a Dragonborn Vampire look like? And you have it right here. Super creepy, terrifying, actually. But again, the salvage, the lore, you have 3 checks there. How to play it, you know, how they think, what they would act like. Because you have to remember, Dragonborn come from a society where oaths and honor is a lot of who they are in their culture. They're very, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. And that's their heritage. And then all of a sudden now you have a creature that is vastly opposed to that. So does it affect their psyche? How do they come to terms with this? Maybe you're playing a Dragonborn and you've been affected with vampirism. You know, all of a sudden now this gives you more information. And then here's the Halfling Vampire. That's terrifying. I don't like any of this. That's just terrifying child monster. It just looks creepy. But again, beautiful artwork, inspires you. Really kind of brings everything together. And then I jumped ahead. So chapter 3 talks about playing intelligent monsters. And then chapter 4, I want to talk about magic items and salvage. Again, a great thing. They go over the power of survival in the narrative, the power of salvage, you know, what this means, overcoming incredible odds, you know, the whole, why is this important? And again, if you're looking, hopefully, you know, in the next, we know the Dungeons and Dragons next, it's coming out, and hopefully they take cues here and put this in their monster manuals, you know, salvage things you would find off these monsters. It's not a lot, you know, but it does make it way more interesting. You know, I think this is something I've been clamoring for. A lot of my players clamor for. Even other GMs I know, they love having all this lore at their fingertips, and especially if you're coming into the gaming community. And now, you know, not many of us have the luxury of having been playing since the 70s or the 80s when it first came out. So why is a mind flayer? You know, we pick up lore and it's hard to get all of it condensed. So this is really important, you know, especially having the lore under the monsters. It's really awesome. And then chapter 5, they talk about monsters as PCs. We've had this before. Tasha's Cauldron came out, and Tasha's Everything, it came out, and we now know how to kind of build a player character based on a monster. You know, that's a rough word there, but based on a non common player class. And they just talk about the traits. Here we have Bugbear, if you want to play a Bugbear, and how you would make them work in your world. They talk about monstrous heroes. Again, this is built in their world, in their homebrew world, but obviously in your world, you would play it as you would want. So, a lot of great things about this book. It's a solid pickup, especially if you're just kind of getting into the world. Now, obviously, it's based in Grim Hollow, so it's a very grim dark. So if you're playing in the Critical Role universe, you can probably import some of these monsters. Not all of them are going to fit exactly. But with that being said, much of it can work in any world that you're playing in. It has a ton of lore. Most of the monsters have a lot of lore behind them. It has those intelligence checks, the lore checks that would build on this. And again, I'm a very big proponent of having those checks. I feel that 5th edition is lacking that, and this kind of makes up for it greatly. As well as Salvage. That's one of the greatest things I've ever seen in a book so far. You have the Salvage set where you defeat a monster, and you now know as a GM what they should be getting. Obviously, you can add whatever you need to add. Oh, I wanted to let the players find a special magic item there, maybe a wand. They can find that also. But this is more of like, okay, it's, we defeated the Blood Ooze. What would the Blood Ooze? What's valuable there? And all of a sudden you salvage it, and you're like, oh, this is awesome. It gives me so much more information. Again, I really hope Wizards of the Coast is really looking at books like this and are going to be pushing information and moving in a line like this. I'm really hoping they're seeing what the community is putting out, and it's kind of like, maybe we should work like this. Maybe moving forward we should do stuff like this. And that's really it. So again, you could pick it up on their website. You can go to their website. You could get all the information. You could find out about their world. Maybe you're really into the grim dark. You played in high fantasy. Now you want to kind of play in a little different of a setting. Something closer to like Dark Crystal, right? That was very dark. If you know what Dark Crystal is, you're as old as me. I just dated myself there. But maybe you want to play with a little darker setting. This is perfect. You could pick it up. You could play in their world. Have fun, enjoy yourself. I would really suggest this. It's up there on books I would definitely want in my library. With that being said, if you could do me a solid and like and subscribe and maybe comment down below. Maybe you've played in Grim Hollow. Have you ever had any adventures in there? What are some things you like? Maybe you have your own version of a salvage system and you've put it together. What were some of your ideas with monsters? Did you pick up any of the other books from this system? And if so, which ones were they? But with that being said, I'm GM Jared, and from all of us here at Nothing Venture, Nothing Game, we like rolling dice, giving advice with a little bit of that New York spice. Peace.